Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to this beautiful evening that we have. It's almost a full moon, I think. And if it's a bit smoky in my garage, as we just did a barbecue. And it's not bad. But here we are. It's a little cooler tonight, so I've got my puffy vest on. And we in Canada call these toques, or you call them beanies, or I don't know, hats, I guess, but so we call them toques. So if you say, hey, John, you got your toque on? I do. Let me just finish what was said in the last chapter with this new book by Russell Moore, The Storm-Tossed Family. He says this: to make it through, we must recognize why family is so important to us and why family can never be ultimate to us. We must see the family clearly, but we must see beyond it. The only safe harbor for a storm-tossed family is a nail-scarred home. Chapter 2, The Cross as Family Crisis. If you ask me my favorite holiday, I would probably say Christmas or Easter. But I would want to risk saying that while we're hooked up to a lie detector. The polygraph would probably jump all around radically until blushingly I admit the truth. It's always been Halloween. I'm reluctant to admit that because some of you might think poorly of me. I know I'm supposed to hate Halloween because I'm an evangelical Christian and of the more conservative sort. Of you will expect me to dismiss All Saints' Eve as the devil's holiday. Many would expect to see me manning the Bobbing for Bibles booth at the church fall festival or helping blindfolded children at the Reformation Day gathering play, quote, the pin the thesis on the castle door. Some would think that Halloween night would mean my family turning off all the lights and pretending not to be home, while the costumed children of our neighborhood find gospel tracts on our doorstep where a jack-o'-lantern should be. I'm supposed to hate Halloween, but I just can't do it. Since I was a very small child, Halloween brought to me, tidings of comfort and joy. As a child, I took serious what the old people said about the holiday as the, quote, the devil's night, about the veil between the spirit world and ours being especially and dangerously thin at that night. That was what I liked about it. Halloween, it seemed, took seriously what I intuitively knew to be true. The world outside was terrifying. The night also seemed to reinforce what I had read in the Bible, that the universe around me was alive with invisible forces, some of which meant me harm. Halloween seemed to be the night when grown-ups would admit this, and at least a little bit. And it seemed to my younger self, too, that if there were scary realities out there, the idea of calendaring them into one night to recognize them for what they were made sense. So the best part of the night for me had nothing to do with candy or costumes, but rather when the night was over, when I was tucked away in bed, knowing that my parents were asleep on the other side of the sheetrock wall. The night outside might be howling with witches and werewolves, but all was safe at home. That seemed far from pagan to me. It seemed, as a matter of fact, right in line with my biblical ancestors in ancient Egypt. The angels of death could lurk around outside the house all they wished, but the blood was on the doorpost, and all would be well. There's another reason I couldn't pass a holiday polygraph, though. The lie detector wouldn't let me get away with saying that this is the sole reason for my love of Halloween. Some of it was because, unlike Christmas or Thanksgiving, there was never any family drama on Halloween. No one packed us up and to drive to the house of some great aunt or second cousin on Halloween. No one sat us down at a card table for a meal, someone frantically stressed about getting just right. No one would compare this Halloween to Halloweens of years past. No one would get his or her feelings hurt or upend Halloween with a fiery dinner table discussion about how Uncle Ronnie's he just drinks too much. No one had to pretend that this was the most wonderful time of the year. No one slammed a door and cried out through tears, "You've ruined our Halloween." However scary headless horsemen and swamp things could be, sometimes a Christmas dinner or an Easter egg hunt or a wedding reception or a child's birthday party can be even more terrifying than a haunted wood. Family, though, it's supposed to be a refuge from it all. It's supposed to be warm and tranquil and sentimental. That's certainly the image most of us project in our Christmas cards. Well, to be sure, these presentations are usually true so far as they go. Most people don't just make up that little Connor won the science fair this year or that Emma made partner in her law firm. Most people don't announce that there are rumors of restraining orders against Aunt Flossie and that are fake news. But much goes unseen and unsaid for obvious reasons. Much of what goes on in our families is underground. Whether that's the annoyances of emotional conflict or the very real trauma of some family secret. That's because in our culture and in many others, family is often an arena for winning and displaying. Our family mirrors to the outside world the kind of person we want others to see us to be. Let me just read that one more time. Our family mirrors to the outside world the kind of person we want others to see us to be. If something is awry with our family, we are afraid that people will conclude that something is badly wrong with us. And so, despite the fact that family can sometimes scare us half to death, we smile our way through it. A friend of mine likes to say that he knew that parenting would be humbling. He just didn't know that it would also be humiliating. Even when all is going well, one never knows when a toddler will tell his Sunday school class the new words he's learned when mommy was yelling at daddy that last night. And that only increases. As a child ages, every day could bring a word of catastrophic pregnancy or a failed school term or a lost job or a broken engagement or a car wreck. And it seems there's nothing one can do about any of it, except look back on pictures at how sweet the baby used to be, and all the ways you failed as a parent. The truth is, though, that it is not just parenting that humiliates. Virtually every part of life in a family becomes humiliating, if only because we ultimately reveal in our families just how dependent we can be. being a husband or a wife, a brother or a sister, a son and or a daughter humiliates too. In relationship with people, we are bound to disappoint and to be disappointed, to wound and to be wounded. As a part of a family, it is almost impossible to maintain the image of ourselves we so carefully construct for the world and for our own sense of meaning. Perhaps you, like me, have looked at all your family failures and wondered, why does this have to be this hard? If you are like me, you have searched for information to learn how to navigate all of this in a way that isn't humiliating. What I tend to want is a list of surefire principles to help me navigate life in a family. And I always have. No matter what stage of life I was in, no matter my place in the family at the time, as a boy, I wanted a foolproof guide to get my parents to understand how hard algebra was for me. That a, quote, C grade really was good enough. And to show me how to meet the way too high expectations of my grandmother next door. As a teenager, I wanted a list of principles that would guarantee I could resist sexual temptation, or better yet, show me a loophole that would allow me to yield to it and stay a good Christian. More truthfully, I wanted principles that would show me how to get a girl to like me enough that I would have temptation options to actually overcome. As a young man, I wanted a step-by-step guide by choosing the right kind of wife. And after marriage, my wife and I both wanted a list of steps that would ensure we wouldn't end up like the other couples that we had seen in divorce courts, scrapping it out with each other, somehow even worse, lying together in middle age in a loveless, sexless, resentment-filled bed. I wanted a list of all the things expected of a Christian husband, from which chores I should do to how I could make sure my wife feels loved enough that she would never seek the attention of some soccer dad in the produce aisle at the grocery store. On into our marriage, I wanted the exact worded prayer to cause us to conceive children, when that turned out harder than we expected. After the children came, we wanted to know whether to schedule feed them or to attachment parent, or whether to schedule preschool violin lessons or roller derby instruction. I wanted a comprehensive guidebook for how to keep my children from getting drunk in high school, drug addicted in college, divorced in midlife crisis. I'm sure one day I'll want explicit directions on how to guarantee I will relate well to my future grandchildren as they soar above me on their hovercraft, communicating telepathically with their artificially intelligent cyborg friends. At every stage, I want an exhaustive list of steps for how to stop comparing everyone else's shiny, happy lives with what seems for me like my keeping just one step ahead of disaster every second. There are many reasons, of course, why family is so difficult. The most important reason, though, is one we rarely talk about. The stakes are high. That much most of us know. Some people rage against their parents all their lives. Even after their mother and father are long dead, others spend years resenting their children for all the trouble they put them through. We often see the stakes as high, but we don't often see why. Family can enliven us, or they'll crush us. Because family is more than just the life cycle of our genetic material. Family is spiritual warfare. Family is one of the pictures of the gospel that God has embedded in the world around us. Through a really dark glass, we can see flashes in the family of something at the core of the universe itself, of the fatherhood of God, of the communion of the people with one another. Not every personal being likes us to see that. Even more than Halloween, the Bible tells us the truth about what's out there. And if the scriptures are right, then ancient cultures were right, that there are invisible and hostile powers afoot in the cosmos, and these powers rage against the picture of the gospel, wherever it is found, because the gospel is a sign of the end of their reign, of the crushing of their heads. That's why the fall of humanity presented in the earliest pages of Scripture is not simply a story of personal guilt or shame. The fall immediately splinters husband from wife, brother from brother, father from daughter, uncle from cousin, all just in the opening chapters of Genesis. If the family is not wrecking you, it's only because you don't know what is going on. And to all of that, the Bible does not give us a family manual. The Bible gives us instead a word of the cross. By the cross. I don't mean shorthand for Christian principles or, quote, family values. By the cross, the tangled mess of a murder scene outside the gates of Jerusalem. The Bible says much about family, but it does not do so from the warmth or of the hearth, but from the place of the skull. As a matter of fact, the most important truths about life in the family are not found in the passages we think of as family passages. Those are most likely to hear preached on Mother's Day or Father's Day or at a wedding ceremony. The most important passages related to the family is probably in the account of Jesus, quote, bearing his own cross to the place called the place of the skull in John 19:17, where in the agony of execution, Jesus would cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me? It would be easy to conclude, as those standing around, and no doubt did, that this was the complaint of one who was rejected and utterly abandoned by his God. But Jesus here was not spontaneously venting a complaint to the empty skies. He was quoting a lyric from a song. Every account of the crucifixion in the Gospels is riddled with references to Psalm 22, a song of David. From this cry of anguish to the soldiers gambling for his clothes to the agony of thirst, Psalm 22 is a song meant to be sung by the worshiping people of God, a song that tells a story from seeming desolation all the way through to a realization of the steadfast love of God. This song from the cross has everything to do with family. One of the hardest things for us to grasp as family members, whether as sons or daughters, husbands or wives, mothers, fathers, even as spiritual brothers and sisters within the church, is just how complicated it all is. I just don't mean the mechanics of getting along with one another or modeling good marriages or good parenting, of honoring our mothers and our fathers. I mean the unique mixture that comes with family of joy and terror and beauty and brokenness. A new study will come out every once in a while that shows that parents are happier than those who have no children, or that married people are happier than people who are single. And then another study will come out that will show the reverse, that parents are more depressed than those who have no children, or that married people have more anxiety and regrets in relationship to their non-married peers. Families grow us up and make us stable. One study will show, but families destabilize us and drive us crazy. The next study will show. I suspect that both sets of data are true. Family is awesome. Family is terrible. As Christians, we already have a category for that. The cross shows us how we can find beauty and brokenness, justice and mercy, peace and wrath, all in the same place. The pattern of the Christian life is crucified glory. And this is as true for our lives in our families as in everything else. As he is crucified, Jesus is, on the one hand, utterly alone. The sign above his head reads, "The King of the Jews." This is a sarcastic reference, seemingly contradicting by the very fact of its location. The sign demonstrated that he was rejected by the Roman Empire around him and by his own people, right down to his tribe and his village. He seemed cast out and doomed by his family, his people, and his God. The song of Jesus' mind tells us a different story, though. David, there in Psalm 22, did indeed sing of his God-forsaken state, but he just didn't stop there. He remembered his family history. He says, "In you our fathers trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them." Psalm 22:4. And he remembered his own immediate family story. "Yet you are he who took from me from the womb. You made me trust you at my mother's breast. On you was I cast from my birth and from my mother's womb, and you have been my God. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, and there is none to help." Psalm 22, 9, 11. Even as Jesus' disciples fled from him in shame, he could still cite Psalm 22 while looking out from the cross at his mother. In the moment of his greatest desolation, Jesus could see the invisible outline of God's mercy and presence there in the one from whom his human nature he learned to trust, a fathering, nurturing God. He learned that from his mother. And there she stood. And Jesus said, echoing his ancestor David, "I can count all my bones." Psalm 22:17. The horror of the scene was not the whole story, and Jesus knew the whole song. As she watched her son ripped apart by nails, struggling to gasp for air, Mary no doubt remembered the words of the prophet Simeon in the first day of her baby's life. At the 8th day of dedication at the temple, Simeon foresaw that the child would be the appointed one, the fall and the rising for many in Israel, and for a sign that is opposed. Looking at Mary, the aged prophet said, "A sword will pierce through your own soul also." She could hardly have imagined this soul-rendering sword would be a Roman cross. And yet, she was not alone in the collateral damage of the crucifixion. Jesus said that all of us must carry the cross. We can only find our lives by losing them and by being crucified with him, we will be broken too. I'm not sure what your family situation is, and as you read these words on the page, but maybe you dread another Thanksgiving with some aunt asking you, "So, are you seeing anyone special?" Even worse, you dread the day she stops asking, because that means that she's given up on you ever finding someone. And maybe you're newly married and you're scared. You look at smiling faces in the wedding pictures and you can't help but notice the same source of smiles in your parents' old wedding photos. And you know those smiles didn't last, but degenerated into hatred and acrimony. You are in love, but so were they. You made vows and meant them. Till death do you part. So did they. Maybe you resent every baby shower invitation you get because you keep seeing month after month that one pink line on the pregnancy test instead of 2. Or maybe you sit in church hoping no one will know that your daughter is in prison or that your son is on a sex offender registry. Or maybe you're just lying on a bed in a room smelling of ammonia, asking the nurse one more time if anyone called for you, knowing from her wincing, forced smile that the answer is no. You can tell that she feels sorry for you and that she fears ending up like you. All of that can be scary and exhausting. On the other hand, you might have the family that others around you envy. Maybe your parents are exactly the ones you would have chosen. Maybe your marriage is affectionate and growing in intimacy as you age together. Or maybe your children are well-behaved and successful and constantly in touch. And maybe then you wonder how long this is going to last. That can be scary and exhausting too. Family is hard because family is unpredictable. You cannot plan out your life. You cannot choose your parents or your genes or your upbringing the way you choose your career path. You cannot know everything about your future spouse or fit your children into some pre-existing life plan. Family means vulnerability. You can be hurt. You will be hurt. And you will hurt others. You will learn to love others so much that you wish you could protect them from what's out there. Being bullied at the bus stop, that fiancé who breaks the engagement, a bone marrow transplant in the oncology ward, a family who also exposes who we really are, stripping us of our pretensions and our masks. Family will, sooner or later, reveal that we are not the person our families need us to be. We are naked before our illusions. And those closest to us eventually learn that we do not have it all together. In the fullness of time, we will feel not only the cross on our back, but the sword through our soul. And yet, from the place of the skull, Jesus joined his song to that of David. He knew not only the dark passages of that song, but the whole thing. When he sang of what he learned from his mother, he could see her there, and not just her. The psalm ended with David announcing, "I will tell of your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise you." There, Jesus could see from his cross the disciple he loved, John. Even from the cross, Jesus was occupied with family matters, arranging an adoption, handing responsibility of Mary and her care over to John. "Woman, behold your son," he said to his mother, and to John, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, John recounts, he took her into his own home. In something as seemingly mundane as arranging care for a parent, Jesus demonstrated that the little burdens of a family matter, and that they are a part of a larger burden of a cross. Moreover, he was showing us that we need one another. We cannot be families if we are not disciples first. We must recognize the joys and responsibilities that come from being a part of a family formed not by the blood of biology, but the blood of crucifixion. The church has often failed at this point. In too many cases, we have turned congregations into silos packed with countless minivans full of individual families coming to receive instruction and then return to their own individual contained units. The end result, especially in a rootless, hypermobile American culture, is the reality of mothers who are lonely and fear that they're failing, but who don't want to say anything for fear of being judged or starting up the mommy wars, or fathers who are lonely but who aren't supposed to signal that they don't know what to do about their son's pornography addiction or their daughter's anorexia. Our churches are often filled with unmarried or divorced or widowed men and women who believe that they are without family because there is no one to stand beside them in church, in the church directory picture. And yet, the cross shows us that we need one another. We will never be godly families until we are brothers and sisters to one another. Years ago, I was serving as a minister in a church and would lead our Wednesday night Bible study through a time of taking prayer requests. One night, a woman came up after the service was over and said, "I didn't want to say this in front of everyone, but can you pray for my daughter?" She looked furtively over her shoulders as though scouting out the presence of an enemy spy drone and whispered, "She's gone away to college and become an atheist." I promised to pray, but asked why she was whispering. "Oh, I don't want everyone to wonder what we had done to make our daughter an atheist," she said. "I didn't want to embarrass my husband like that." Something has gone terribly wrong when a Christian feels that she must protect herself from her church for fear that her daughter's spiritual crisis will be discussed as part of a debate over whether she should have breastfed longer or whether she should have chosen homeschooling over public school. That's especially true when literally every family in Scripture, without exception, has prodigals, including that of God the Father. Family is humiliating, yes, which is one reason I hesitate to even write this book. Family discloses sooner or later that we are not the experts we think we are. When my oldest sons were just learning to read, they would sound out the words on the billboards we would pass in the car when we were living in a time in Louisville, Kentucky. One day we passed an advertisement for Budweiser beer with just the words of the abbreviation Bud Light. My son Ben asked, "What is Bud Light?" Not really wanting to get into the whole discussion of alcoholic beverages and all that comes with that, I just said, "It's a drink some people drink." A few weeks later, I saw a gaggle of senior adults at a church where I was preaching gathering around my little son. He had, I learned, just announced to them, "You know what my dad's favorite drink is? Bud Light." Now, I do not drink even a thimbleful of beer or any other alcohol. And I served what is probably perhaps the most anti-alcohol church communion in the world. I was tempted to just go ahead and form a committee to investigate myself. Parenting only became more humiliating from there. with many moments where I wondered, as I have with my marriage, whether I am competent to do this. But if it were not so, we would not need to seek the power of one another or the Lord in prayer. God told his children in the desert wandering that he had humbled them, made them to hunger, and disciplined them as a man disciplines his son, so that they might know that a man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. If family were easy, we could do it in our own fleshly, self-propelled willpower. If we could do it on our own, we would not bear a cross. And if we're not bearing a cross, then what are we doing? It would not matter in the broad sweep of eternity. Family matters. That's why it is hard. As a songwriter, Rich Mullins once put it, I can't see where you're leading me unless you've led me here, where I'm lost enough to let myself be led. Family will do that. Not with our pride and self-sufficiency intact. Thanks be to God. Family can be humiliating, but what's more humiliating than a family is being naked, covered in blood, hoisted on a pole, and while people gamble for one's clothes, and yet we've all been there in Christ. Once we've been crucified and survived to tell the tale, one would think that we could admit to one another that we need help in the spiritual warfare that comes with life together in our families. One would think we could humble ourselves and confess to one another, to ask for forgiveness when we hurt or fail one another. One would think that we could deal honestly with the pain of our own childhoods without fearing that we are predestined to live out our parents' mistakes or to live our lives performing for their approval for whatever they expected of us. Jesus could count all his bones. Everything else was falling apart. But no bones were broken. And at first glance, that seems to be a cold consolation. After all, what difference does it make if one has an intact skeletal system, if one is excluded in the most torturous method possible? Jesus did not have bones made of titanium steel. He was not surrounded by a force field. His bones would have snapped just as easily as did the legs of the crucified murderers and terrorists on either side of him. Why did and why does this matter? The lack of broken bones there at the cross was a sign to Jesus, along with the face there of his mother, that whatever happened could not go any further than God's purposes, and that God's purposes were good. Whatever the soldiers were doing, their actions were not random and chaotic. The veil of the temple was ripped asunder, and the seam in Jesus' garment was not, nor were the bones in his legs. God might seem to be absent at the cross, but he was not. He was there, as elsewhere, providentially ruling, even through the most wicked actions imaginable. Your skeletal system is the last identifiable piece of who you are or who you were, the last to decay away into dust. That's why a skull can be so startling to see. Jesus could count all his bones because of the mystery of God's providence, which works behind and through and the most awful things that can happen to us. God handed him over to the curse, to judgment, to death. But even then, God did not utterly break him. Jesus' intact skeleton was a sign that no matter how much it seemed that he had been abandoned, the steadfast love of God would not depart. God was still there. Being a part of a family, whatever the part and whatever the family, is essential to our flourishing as a people. And being a part of a family, wherever the part or wherever the family, it's difficult. That should be neither surprising nor dispiriting for a people of the cross. All of us are failures at family. That's because all of us are part of families, and all of us are fallen. The cross shows us that the family can be an arena of God's mercy and God's glory. Being a child can point us to our dependence on our God, a dependence seen most perfectly in the helpless figure of a crucified Christ. Committing his spirit to his Father, our sibling relationship can point us to the joys and the difficulty of being part of a bustling band of brothers and sisters in the church. Marriages can point to the union of Christ and his church, a union sealed at the cross. Parenting can point to the fatherhood of God, a fatherhood seen in the darkest moments of the cross, as well as the vibrant moments of resurrection and celebration. All these seemingly mundane relationships, then, are not just about what it means to be happy. They all are, in some way or another, part of the training ground for our ultimate destinies as joint heirs with Christ and heirs of the universe. So we need practical wisdom on the family. The Bible gives it to us. We need to know how to honor our parents without being enmeshed with them. We need to know how to honor our marriage without idolizing it. We need to know how to discipline the next generation in a way that is neither harsh nor negligent. But before all of that, we need to see the vulnerability of family within the prism of cross-bearing. I don't know about you, but I don't want that. I would rather protect myself from the possibility of hurt with a hard exterior shell, not the soft vulnerability of breakable bones. Nothing opens one up to more potential for hurt, more vulnerability than being part of a family. Parents can nurture you, but they can also reject you. A spouse can love you, but also could leave you. Children can bring joy, but just might one day ask for that inheritance early and head off for a pigsty of rebellion in a far country. I don't mind working hard for my family, but I wince at the thought of one day needing my family to empty my bedpan and wipe my drooling mouth. And yet, that vulnerability is what God uses to conform us to Christ. He does not make us holy through Pharaoh-like exercises of power, but through the hidden dynamism of the cross. That sort of vulnerability means, of course, that bad things are possible. Your parents might disown you. Your spouse might find someone else. Leukemia might ravage your child. The gospel doesn't hide any of this from you. The gospel doesn't promise you prosperity and tranquility, but the gospel does promise you that you are never outside the reach of the fatherly providence of God. A providence that fits you with a cross, not to destroy you, but to give you a future. Your skeleton is safe, even at the place of the skull. Bit of a longer devotion tonight, but I think it's one of those devotions where you have to unpack the wholeness of it, of how family has the potential to hurt and to be blessing, and to know that you're a part of a forever family, that we're never to be called into a solitary life, even as in church. And I love that story about the woman that comes up to him and says, "Hey, could you pray for my daughter? She's become an atheist." And he's like, "Why are you whispering?" And it's like that weird sense, like, well, I don't want people to know and see that this is what's happened in our family. The reality is, why not? We've all got our own hurts and wounds and brokenness. I know with my own family, I'm not an angel. I caused massive damage in my family before I became a follower of Jesus. But that's part of family. And I'm trying the best to be a good husband and a good dad. And I screwed up all the time. But I trust Jesus, and I carry my cross. And it's through that cruciform position, that posture of that I die and that may God live in and through me. That's my solace. That's my strength. The joy of the Lord is my strength. That's the depth that I can reach into, is when I'm at my end. God is just at the beginning of his source of strength. We're going to continue this. I probably won't do as long devotion in the morning. I'll have to break it up a bit, but God bless you. And there's a lot to chew on as I was speaking on tonight about family and how the cross shapes our families and how we are to be vulnerable and caring and real with our loved ones, our mums and our dads and our wives and our husbands and our children. The struggle is real, but Jesus is real. The cross was a symbol of death, but through his resurrection, we have great source of power and healing. God bless you. Have a great night, and we'll see you tomorrow morning. All right, bye for now.